This manhwa begins with a scene of a dimly lit night sky under the bright full moon. In the White Demon Castle, the Lady Goddess of Darkness, Heloise, calls out the White Demon Saint, Chen Bai, our protagonist. With a cold stare, Heloise said to a Breathless Bai that his failure in his previous mission had put her in a bad mood. So for his punishment, he had to be deleted out of existence. Maybe, if he ends up in hell, he will learn a thing or two about the consequences of failing a mighty being such as herself. Shocked at the unexpected and unforgiving turn of events, Bai, sweating profusely, begged for his life. He loudly asked Heloise to please consider his past accomplishments and give him another chance. Unfortunately, his plea fell on deaf ears as Heloise continued that lowly being such as him has no right to request another opportunity from her mighty self. And as for Bai's white magic castle, well, it will face the same fate as him, obliterated with the darkness. So with that, endless darkness descends on the white magic castle, devouring everything in sight, including him. Seeing this, Bai struggles pointlessly to survive. However, moments later, he was plunged in the pit of the endless darkness. As he was being consumed, he thought of how he had completed nearly 100 quests for Heloise, to the point that it was basically the entire sum up of his life, and due to his dedication, he was still a virgin loser. But just because of one failure, he was being wiped out. On top of that, Heloise never considered him as nothing other than a lowly human trash. In that case, fuck this shit. He refused to accept it. He would never submit to this bitch. As the darkness consumed 80% of his body, leaving his head to his chest with one arm, Bai laughed menacingly about his fucked up situation. So with his remaining strength, he gave Heloise the middle finger, calling her an evil dark bitch as his final act of defiance. However, Heloise, with her cold and nonchalant demeanor, casually stepped on Bai's remaining body like squashing a disgusting bug under her feet into the sea of endless darkness. So as his remaining body finally deteriorate, leaving his hourglass necklace, Bai suddenly woke up from his bed, shouting on top of his lungs, still cursing and giving the middle finger to Heloise. Sweating bullets, he regained his bearings and wondered why he was not dead. Turning his head from left to right and right to left, he noticed that he was in his dorm from his college days. How did I get here? Wasn't I killed by that bitch? Bai questioned himself in complete shock. He then wondered if it was a dream, but the decades of trial he went through felt so real. Steeling his resolve, he concluded that it wasn't a dream. It was in that moment that he noticed his necklace, the hourglass. It was the item he obtained 20 years after the arrival of the Universal Will, and when the trial began, it was the most unique item he had ever seen. The hourglass can't display any attributes and can't be destroyed, so he always kept it with him. He also remembered that the sand was at the bottom, it wouldn't flow even if turned upside down, but now it's at the top. So with that, Bai believed that the sand flowing back meant time had reversed, and as he checked the current time he was in. June 5, 2023, 10 days before the arrival of the Universal Will and the start of the trial. It is revealed that 10 days later, on the 15th of June, the Universal Will would officially arrive and the trial will begin. More than 90% of humanity will die, and the deceased humans will turn into various zombies and monsters. All conventional weapons will fail, and the world will witness its demise in just one night. However, along with the dangers of the Universal Will and the trial, came opportunities for those who survived. They awaken innate abilities, and many magical equipment and items from various copies were also descended onto Earth along with the Universal Will. These good things even attracted gods who control the rules of the universe, and these gods cannot directly intervene in the trial, so they attract humans under the guise of protection, attempting to gain benefits from it. In his previous life, he was not strong enough, and due to this, he paid a lot to just join under Heloise's command. Bai desperately completed every task Heloise assigned him, trying to enhance his status, but what he never expected was to be erased just for failing one mission. Moments later, Bai received series of notifications as he searched the news for any weird abnormality. He found what he was looking for, and the news made mention of a new type of rabies, something like zombies from the movies. Patients at Jiangcheng First Hospital are going crazy and biting people. Also, something unbelievable occurred at the hospital. Apparently a body in the middle of forensic dissection at the medical examiner's office woke up. Bai read everything and knew where to start his quest in getting stronger. This time, he plans on getting stronger enough that he wouldn't rely on anyone or any god. Scratch that. He wants to become strong enough to crush even the gods. To crush their narcissistic asses under his feet just like that bitch Heloise did to him. Also, he will make her pay for what she did to him, Bai vowed to himself. So with that, he made his way to the hospital, thinking that 10 years later after the trial began, someone claimed to have discovered the only way to upgrade innate abilities. The person said that 10 days before the trial began, a person's innate abilities actually became effective, and if one discovers and utilizes their innate abilities, they can upgrade them. Again, in his previous life, his innate ability was an E-rank virus resistance. According to that method, by thought of using it to upgrade his innate ability, he must use the virus to trigger and strengthen it in advance. Bai hides behind a wall as he listens to a doctor commenting on how such strange symptoms was truly unprecedented. The nurse replied, saying that she feels like the patient looks exactly like a zombie in the movies. When they left, Bai sneaked in and approached the patient, whose body was heavily restrained, and his mouth was restrained as well to avoid any noise. He stood directly beside the patient, silently confirming out loud that it was indeed a zombie, and as he plunged a syringe into the patient's arm for his blood. Bai commented that to utilize and train his virus resistance innate ability, he can only rely on this patient's blood. He drew some of his blood, commenting that it was enough to trigger his innate ability. A while later, he arrived at his dorm, noticing that his roommates were not present, indicating that they were going to stay up all night. He then took out the syringe with the zombie's blood, momentarily stared at it, thinking that if the theory was wrong, then he will die. Fuck it. He will take his chance. He plunged the syringe in his arm and injected the blood into his body. Before the time reset, Bai struggled for decades as a weakling, barely surviving until he finally made progress. So even if he awaked an E-rank innate ability again, this time knowing the future, he would still miss opportunities due to being too weak. So as the blood seeps into his body, bulging his veins and eyes, Bai experienced an unimaginable pain. He willed himself, commenting that to start over and still be weak was equivalent to him begging for death. If that's the case, he might as well just die now. Seconds later, his wish was granted as he collapses on the floor, losing consciousness as everything fades into complete darkness. In the darkness, Heloise stood in front of his struggling, crouching form. She called out to him, telling him to just give up his futile resistance and embrace the darkness. As a lowly human as himself, he should just be part of the darkness as that was his most fitting end. Seeing the hallucinated figure, Bai commented, "Oh please, not this bitch again. Seriously Heloise, even in my sea of consciousness you still want to torment me." Bai roared loudly with complete determination and hatred-filled expression. "Just you wait, you fucking bitch. Chen Bai will make you pay for everything." A while later, in his dormitory, Bai stood on his balcony, still in a zombie state. He heard the noise of his dorm's door opening, and as he turned around, his roommates stared at his appearance with an expression like their souls had left their bodies. They immediately took a defensive stance and asked him what was going on. Hearing his name snapped him back to his senses, and as they all stood there, momentarily silent and unmoving, Bai welcomed them back and told them he was going to the washroom to clean himself up. He dashes for the door, leaving them speechless. In the washroom, he stared in the mirror, ecstatic that the theory worked. The zombie virus didn't kill him, and his innate ability has upgraded successfully. He also wondered what level his innate ability will be after awakening. At that moment, the Universal Will appeared, congratulating Chen Bai on being selected as a pioneer, receiving the title of Pioneer and Awakening in advance. Bai heard the announcement in his head and immediately knew that it was the voice of the Universal Will. Also, he thought that if he had already awakened, then he can open his status window. He first opened the title interface with a joyful expression. As a pioneer, he was among those who had discovered, utilized, and trained their abilities before the trial began, therefore he can possess this title. All attributes increase by 5%, experience gain also increases by 10%. So with that, he can open his attribute panel in advance. A sly grin formed on his face as he thought that a percentage boost was the perfect title. Bai then went on to check his innate ability panel. In excitement, his hand dented the tile he was resting his hands on. His innate ability was the Virus Monarch, an SSS awakened ability. The Virus Monarch was the most powerful ability in the virus element. It can absorb, utilize, manipulate, transform, and even create viruses. But currently, he only had the ability to absorb viruses, and the range of absorption was very limited. Knowing that he needed a large amount of virus to enhance his ability, Bai immediately thought of a hospital since it was naturally the best place to obtain such item. A while later, Bai arrived back again at the Jiangqing First Hospital. His eyes immediately shot up, shocked, as several people rushed out of the hospital, screaming in horror. A fat guy shouts at Bai, telling him that there was zombies in the hospital, claiming it was the end of the world. Hearing this, he smiled, recalling that in his previous life, he heard people talk about the name of 3 strange incidents that happened in Jiangqing before the trial came. One of them was a sealed hospital. Turns out, Jiangqing First Hospital was the hospital in question that got sealed. The fat guy asked where Bai was going as he dashes forward, smirking brightly, saying that it looks like he came to the right place. He launched towards an incoming zombie, grabs his head and pin him to the ground. The Virus Monarch's talent skill was virus absorption. As he placed his hand on the zombie's face, he absorbed the virus from the zombie's body and gained 1 virus point, used for strengthening his abilities. So, as the rest of the zombies outside rushed towards him, Bai excitedly told them that none of them will be able to escape. Meanwhile, in the hospital on the 4th floor's restroom, a few group of zombies were trapped with 2 people. The guy, Lu Feng, was sweating bullets, repeating to himself that it was over, and he didn't want to die. So as one of the zombies continuously hits on the stall he was hiding in, he turned to a pink short-haired girl, Suzin, who happens to be a nurse at the hospital. Crouching on the floor behind Lu Feng, Suzin asked what they should do now. Hearing this, Lu Feng was silent and started to shake uncontrollably, prompting Suzin to ask what was wrong with him. Lu Feng's expression turned malicious, and as he approached Suzin, he told her that he's been chasing her for so long, but she never agreed. Now that they were about to die, why don't they enjoy themselves before they do? Hearing this, Suzin shouts that Lu Feng was mad. How can he spout such nonsense? Hearing the noise, the zombie plunged his hand in the stall, reaching for them. A second later, the entire door was destroyed as Lu Feng frighteningly looked back, wondering how this situation could be happening. He reached and grabbed Suzin's hand, pulled her past himself, and pushed her towards the zombie, using her as a human meat shield. With Suzin and the zombie out of the way, Lu Feng rushed towards the window. A second later, the same zombie was hot on his heels in a flash. Lu Feng suddenly had a crazy idea. He thought of how it was merely the 4th floor, so there was the possibility of him surviving if he just makes the jump. However, before Lu Feng could take the plunge, the zombie launched for him from behind. Fortunately, the zombie missed, crushing through the window. Unfortunately, Lu Feng died from the sudden impact, hanging on the broken window. His eyes turned completely pale as fresh blood dripped from his nose, signifying his lifeless figure. Several minutes later, it is shown that several zombies were found dead in the lower floors, and as Bai reached the 4th floor, he came across Suzin still in the process of turning into a zombie. So after he dealt with the zombies in the restroom with her, he crouched down beside her and placed his hand on her forehead. Knowing that the military will soon arrive to seal off the hospital, he needed someone who knew the hospital's layout to lead the way. So with that thought, Bai activated his virus absorption and sucked out all the zombie virus inside her, canceling her transformation process. Suzin suddenly opened her eyes, sat up with a surprised realization of what happened to her, and turned to Bai, thanking him for saving her. Bai, however, was a little bit surprised that what he did actually worked. He grabbed her hand and asked her if she remembered what happened. Suzin replied that she does. With no time to waste, Bai then asked her that he needs her help with something in the hospital. However, Suzin, embarrassed with the state of her clothes, replied that she wants to change into something new first. Ignoring her insignificant request, Bai again grabbed her hand and told her that there was no time to waste. She just has to take him to the place where the hospital keeps their viruses. A while later, they were at the hospital's laboratory. Suzin then mentioned that this was where they kept their viruses, and all clinical samples from patients were tested here as well. Grabbing all the viruses he can find, Bai immediately started mixing them together, shocking Suzin to inquire what he planned to do with it. After mixing them, he used his virus absorption skill to siphon everything into his body as series of notification rang out. Bai gained several virus points, such as the initial acquisition of hepatitis of 10 virus points, influenza of 7 virus points, herpes of 9 virus points, and finally an HIV of 10 virus points. With all the viruses absorbed, next was strengthening of the zombie virus with the viruses he just acquired. Bai knew that there were several methods of enhancing his strength. They were the ancestor virus, the dark light virus, the decay virus, the cocci virus, and lastly the T virus. But it seems that the most beneficial method of enhancing his strength was the dark light virus. You see, zombies virus evolves into the dark light virus, and all attributes increase by 10. Self-healing ability also increases by 200%. Bai successfully obtained the core ability of the dark light virus to evolve and devour. He knew that the dark light virus was a virus primarily focused on devouring and evolving. Suddenly, Suzin shouted, telling Bai that a zombie was approaching from the door. Seeing this, Bai told her to stay where she was. Then, in a flash, he grabbed the zombie's neck in the other side of the room. He was amazed with his speed and strength, considering the zombie he's holding weighs about 150 pounds, and he doesn't feel any difficulty at all. He smirks, saying that it was a good opportunity to test his new ability. Suddenly, dark purple vines came out of his hand, and as the zombie screams needlessly, the vines completely covered the zombie, devouring it without a trace. The skill was called the Evolution Devourer. The dark purple vines retracted back into his hand, and as he stretched out his muscles, he was glad that the absorption speed was fast as well, making him recover some of his stamina. Looking totally confused and surprised, Susan wondered what just happened. Making Bai asked her what was wrong, and why that sudden expression on her face. Susan sighed heavily, and replied that Bai saved her, so she trusts that he won't harm her, and she can keep his secret. So with that, Bai officially introduced himself as Chen Bai, and she, in turn, introduced herself as Susan. As the introduction was out of the way, they heard a loud groan and shootings from outside the lab. Bai told Susan that the military and the police were here, and they must have sealed off the hospital in order to clear out the zombies, so they need to leave immediately. As they made a run for it, Bai asked Susan to lead him to the rooftop. They will leave from there. Struggling to keep up, Susan wondered out loud why they couldn't just leave through the main entrance since they hadn't encountered any zombie yet. Bai replied that he didn't have time to be isolated and questioned. Unbeknownst to them, a large evolved zombie was on the ceiling, watching them approaching. When they saw it, Bai quickly pushed Susan to safety and faced the evolved zombie. Susan was frightened, seeing the size of the evolved zombie. She started stuttering, trying to ask what it was. However, Bai, knowing what she was getting at, replied her that it was a mutant. As Bai faced off the mutant, a noticeable amount of fresh blood oozes onto the floor, indicating that he was injured. And as he grabbed his injured arm, the large claw marks began to heal, making him smirk with excitement. He found it interesting to have encountered a mutant this early, and wondered what kind of evolution the dark light virus will produce after absorbing the mutant. As Bai continued to stare at the mutant with a smirk, it launched towards him in a flash. It was upon him with its arms raised, intending to rip him to pieces. Fortunately, Bai quickly noticed. He exerted a considerable amount of effort in his legs, and leaped upwards, dodging the mutant's strike as it broke the floor, denting it greatly. In the air, Bai stepped on the mutant's head, using it as a stepping stone to leap over it. However, with its fast reflexes, the mutant turned its body just enough to use its claws to slash the air, aiming for Bai. Fortunately, Bai angled himself in mid-air, again, dodging the mutant's lethal attack. After putting a significant distance between them, Bai grabbed a nearby zombie and absorbed the virus from its body. As he did, he commented on how the overall quality on the mutant were on par with his. The mutant dashed for him again, and Bai, with his stamina recovered to a degree, his speed and strength also enhanced. He made a fist with his hand, covered with his dark purple vines, and hit the mutant directly on the chest. As the force of the hit threw the mutant into a wall, Bai acknowledged the toughness of the mutant's skin. Again, he then immediately put a distance between himself and the mutant as the mutant fell on the ground. When it got up, its face darkens as it roared loudly with intense killing intent. It was in that moment that Bai's arm completely healed. He also noticed that his hit didn't make any effective damage, implying that it was going to take a lot of time to deal with this mutant. In that moment, Susan used her elbow to break the glass of a nearby fire hose cabinet and took out an axe. She quickly called out to Bai and threw the axe towards him. However, before the axe could reach him, the mutant made a mad dash forward for his neck. Bai, however, with his amazing reflexes, leaped backwards as the mutant claws narrowly missed him. In the air, he caught the axe, thanking Susan. Then, he landed on the mutant's shoulder, and the same as earlier, he used the mutant's shoulder as a stepping stone. But as he made another leap, he swung the axe as the mutant did the same with its claws. Fortunately, its claws merely nicked his stomach, marking his shirt. On the other hand, the axe sliced the mutant across the chest as it roared in pain. So with that, Bai and the mutant engage in a fierce battle as they fought to a draw, both parties momentarily gaining the upper hand. However, neither can seem to land a fatal blow. As the fight drags on, Bai intended to end it soon, so he threw the axe at the mutant. However, when the axe struck the mutant, it feigned indifference and again launched for him, intending to close the gap Bai keeps creating. As the axe bounced back after hitting the mutant, it became apparent that its stamina was wearing out, making it crouch down. Realizing this, Bai approached it, commenting on how he didn't expect the mutant to have held out for as long as it did. He leisurely rested his foot on the mutant's head, and teasingly told it that it should have gone for his head rather than his hand when it had the chance. However, he, on the other hand, would do no such thing. So with that, he raised the axe, intending to relieve the mutant of his head. Unfortunately, the mutant went berserk, veins bulging out on its head as it crashes by into the wall with a massive force. The sudden impact made him spurt out a mouth full of fresh blood. This scene shocked Susan greatly. She immediately calls out to Bai, asking if he was okay. Bai let go of the axe, thinking that there was no other way except devouring. The mutant, with his claws, reached into Bai's stomach, intending to rip him apart. Seeing this, Bai grinned excitedly, asking the mutant if it felt the same. Thus, the prospect of wanting to tear him apart. Hearing this, the mutant roared loudly. A second later, it was shocked to see several dark purple vines burst out of Bai's stomach and started covering every inch of its body. Bai activated his evolution Devour as the dark purple vines completely engulfed the mutant. Seeing this, Bai teased the mutant of being frightened now that it was caught in his web. He continued that it was too late for the mutant to do anything about it other than being his sustenance. Suzin watched the entire scene, and at that moment, she was confused and decided to give up on trying to make sense of what she just saw. Meanwhile, the system chimed in, notifying Bai that the devouring of a second-stage clawed zombie was complete, and his black light virus transformation was in processing. After the processing was complete, he obtained a clawed zombie ability called the Bone Claws. Witnessing this, Bai was ecstatic. He thought devouring and then evolution, it looks like choosing the black light virus was indeed correct. At that moment, multiple footsteps headed their way. Several military men, armed to the teeth, told Bai and Suzin to raise their hands. Simultaneously, they wondered if they were zombies. Bai fell silent for a moment, then turned to Suzin, indicating that he intended for them to make a run for it. As the military men told them that they had to the count of 3 to raise their hands or else they will shoot, Bai lifted Suzin into his arms, and as the countdown reached 0, they started shooting. Several bullets were fired at them as Bai made a run for it. Suzin directed him on the path he should take that leads to the rooftop. However, the continuous rapid firing made her worry, questioning Bai if he was okay. Bai replied, telling her to refrain from speaking and not move in his arms. The scene shifts to the rooftop. The quiet and clean scenery suddenly disappeared as Bai forcefully kicked open the door. He then asked where Suzin's home was, to which she replied that it was in Rongfeng neighborhood, North 4th Road, Nanbai Street. Hearing this, Bai gave a bright smile and told her to hold on. Then, he made a mad dash on the rooftop and suddenly jumped, scaring the living daylight out of Suzin, who hugged Bai tightly by the neck. They arrived at the desired location 20 minutes later, and as Suzin opened the door to her apartment, she directed Bai to where the bathroom was, offering to help him clean and dress his wounds. Bai replied that he was almost healed since the bullets didn't stay inside his body. Hearing this, Suzin felt a little skeptical. This made Bai decide to show her, so he undressed, removing his shirts. Seeing this, Suzin pointed to the wound on Bai's hand, telling him that it wasn't fully healed, then his stomach, and finally, his chest. However, looking at how ripped Bai was, Suzin couldn't help but blush furiously. Reading the room, Bai teasingly said that if he eats her, he would surely make a full recovery. He then asked her what she thought, will she want to sacrifice herself? Hearing this, Suzin answered, saying that if Bai was going to eat her, he would have already done so, since he had numerous opportunities. In that moment, Bai closed that distance between them, and seductively replied that she was wrong. He didn't eat her earlier because the environment wasn't quite suitable. And also, she misunderstood what type of eating he was referring to. So with that, he ripped out the remaining clothes on Suzin's body, saying that the environment was good and more suitable now. He then asked again about what she thought about helping him recover. Will she willingly sacrifice herself? Hearing all this, Suzin's face was all kinds of shades of red. She began stuttering, unable to form a sentence. So Bai took the plunge and kissed her on the mouth. Seconds later, they were in the bathroom, ensuring that his eating session was thoroughly enjoyed without any disturbances. Meanwhile, at the entrance of the bathroom, Bai's phone buzzed excessively. On his phone, series of messages rang out. It was his friend, Zhao Mu, who mentioned that their class beauty, Songgu, was looking for him. Immediately after, Songgu also messaged him, asking if Bai went to Jiangqing First Hospital like his friend told her, and if he was dead. If he wasn't, he should answer her immediately. The very next day, Bai was leisurely walking down on the street, a bag in hand, phone in the other, doing research on the 3 strange incidents that actually happened in Jiangqing before the trial. He found out that including the SEAL Hospital, the other 2 were the suburban bombing and the monster slaughterhouse. Bai didn't know much about these 3 strange incidents. However, given the little information he could find about them before the trial's arrival was an absolute headache. And from the looks of it, nobody seemed to care much about it either. To everyone, it was just something unimportant that was occasionally mentioned in casual conversations. Just then, Suzin called. Bai answered, telling her that he was on his way with their breakfast, but she quickly cut him off. Suzin said that 2 men are at her apartment looking for him, and that's due to the fact that someone named Song Ziqiong wants to see him urgently. She continued that the men looking for him don't look like good people. Also, since they bluntly made mention of Song Ziqiong wanting to see him, then it's highly probable that it's a scam. The reason being that Song Ziqiong is basically the queen of Jiangcheng and doesn't openly invite anyone. Su Xin asked what she should do. Hearing this, Bai replied that they weren't lying, however, she should tell them to wait outside for him. It was at this moment that Bai checked his messages and found out that Song Gu had been trying to reach him non-stop. Song Gu is the daughter of Song Ziqiong. Also, she was a classmate of his and they had some entanglement together in the past. After reading through the messages, Bai found it interesting that Song Gu went to see her mother. And since she could find her way to Su Xin's place meant that she must know something. Bai realized this and decided that it seemed necessary that he meets with Song Ziqiong. A while later, at the suburban freezer warehouse, a car makes a sharp turn before coming to an expected stop. Bai got out of the car, and one of the men told him that Song Ziqiong was waiting for him inside. From rags to riches, Song Ziqiong became the richest person in Jiangcheng by excelling in both legitimate and illegitimate endeavors. Also, after the trial's arrival, she was awakened as an A-level talent, swiftly building her power, and eventually, she unified the whole Jiangcheng amidst the three-way competition, truly becoming someone deserving of the title Jiangcheng's queen. In his past life, Bai could only look up to someone like that. However, things are different now. Bai thought that if she could recruit Song Ziqiong to his side, then there will be much more he can do during the current interval before the trial begins. As they entered the warehouse's corridor, Bai was officially introduced to Song Ziqiong. Song Ziqiong apologizes for bringing him here on such short notice, but she couldn't have it any other way at the moment. Hearing this, Bai asked if there was something she wanted to talk to him about. Song Ziqiong replied that she called Bai here because Xiao Go, her daughter, came home in panic, requesting that she save Bai since he went out of contact at Jiangcheng First Hospital. So the reason for this gathering was to see what kind of man could make her daughter so nervous. She continued that she was curious about what's so charming about Bai to capture her daughter's attention. Hearing this, Bai wasn't buying her bullshit. He bluntly stated that Song Ziqiong should stop beating about the bush and just mention what's the real purpose for her meeting. Song Ziqiong commended Bai for being quite straightforward. So due to this, she won't beat about the bush anymore. She replied that, to put things bluntly, she wants Bai to be her man. He can also have her daughter if he's interested in her, because being her son-in-law wasn't out of the question either. Bai replied, wondering out loud what could be the reason for Song Ziqiong to want him so badly. Song Ziqiong turned back slightly, and with a sly smile, she answered by that with his heroic performance at the hospital, who in their right mind wouldn't want him, or in her daughter's case, have feelings for him. Hearing Song Ziqiong casually made mention of his deeds at the hospital shocked Bai greatly. He remembers destroying the hospital surveillance system and power supply, so how did Song Ziqiong know about what he did at the hospital so quickly? Song Ziqiong teasingly told him not to underestimate her capabilities. At least, during the time from the lobby to the monitoring room, her people could still trace him. Also, she was lucky to conveniently have someone in the hospital who was trapped at the ward. That person luckily saw everything and relayed everything Bai did at the hospital. Thanks to Bai killing all the zombies, she was safe and sound. Unfortunately for Bai, she took a video of his fight against the mutant. So as Song Ziqiong showed by her proof, she was confident in how lucky she was that among the survivors brought out of isolation by the military troops the next morning, she found a colleague of Su Xin who was quite familiar with that bastard Lu Feng. Hearing Lu Feng's name, Bai recalled the night before where he shared with Su Xin. She made mention of Lu Feng. Su Xin said that Lu Feng was in the bathroom with her, and not only did he try to forcefully have his way with her, he also pushed her towards the zombies, using her as a human meat shield. So as Su Xin continued to tell Bai everything that happened to Lu Feng, from running to the window, to getting his head smashed through the window's glass. Finally realizing Lu Feng was the one hanging on the window, Bai questioned Su Xin if Lu Feng wasn't dead when he came in. Su Xin replied that she believed he was. However, she hates Lu Feng so much for what he did to her, and wants nothing to do with him. Anyway, she feels much better now, and she would like to continue what they started earlier. Bai cheekily stared at a blushing Su Xin with one eye, and replied that he really didn't expect her to be a first-timer. Also, Su Xin's screams from just moments earlier was quite tragic. Su Xin apologizes and Bai answered that it was okay since they had plenty of time in the future. However, Su Xin was not having it. She replied that she must satisfy her lifesaver at any cost. So with that, she got on top and the rest was a wild marathon throughout the night. Back at the suburban freezer warehouse at the corridor freight elevator's first floor, Bai asked Song Ziqiong if she could tell him where the isolated survivors were. But Song Ziqiong tried to leverage this information by telling Bai to agree to being his. Then and only then will she tell him. Hearing this, Bai answered that Song Ziqiong had really underestimated him. Song Ziqiong said that Bai was right, with just this piece of information it wouldn't match a man of his skill. She tried to continue, but Bai cut her off by saying that Song Ziqiang misunderstood what he said. What he implied was that Song Ziqiang knew little about him because if she did, then she would have known that he couldn't be her man, but rather the other way around. She would become his woman instead. So with a sly grin, Bai activated his bone claws skill, trying to intimidate Song Ziqiang, and also show her what she was up against by extension. Seeing this, Song Ziqiang, with a visibly worried expression, asked if that was really a mutation of the zombie virus. Her bodyguard immediately got in front of her, alert and ready to fight Bai if it comes to it. However, Bai just casually waved his hand, deactivating the bone claw skill, continuing that if Song Ziqiang agrees to be his woman, she will also tell her what it was that he just did. With both parties at a stalemate, Bai asked Song Ziqiang what she thought about his offer. Song Ziqiang just smiled and replied that Bai also underestimates her as well. With just those claws, did he think she could win her over? Moreover, Bai already has Su Xin and she is pretty as well. Why will he be interested in an old lady such as herself? In a flash, Bai was delicately holding Song Ziqiang's chin, and with a touch of his unlimited riz, he replied that who wouldn't be tempted by such a beautiful woman. He continued by purposefully saying that everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and at least in these days before the apocalypse, there were much more Song Ziqiang could do for him that Su Xin can't. The word apocalypse didn't go unnoticed by Song Ziqiang. She asked what just a few zombies could do. Zombies? They are not even worthy of being called a warm-up. Bai replied her with a devilish grin. Hearing this, Song Ziqiang knew that Bai knew more than what he was willing to share. More than she could even imagine, Bai replied. At this point, Song Ziqiang knew that they were both not the type that will submit to the other. So, she proposed a cooperation, her help for Bai's knowledge. Hearing this, Bai readily agreed as both parties shook on it. As they did, Bai commented on how conquering the Queen of Zhenqing was indeed not easy to do. Song Ziqiang replied that it wasn't. However, she'd never come across any man who could conquer her, and she is actually looking forward to that person. However, she encourages Bai to keep up with his effort. As they were filling each other out, a loud bang rang across the entire warehouse. It was a gunshot, alerting them to wonder what was going on. As the shootings intensify, Song Ziqiang explained to Bai that a night ago, Commander Huang of the Jiangcheng military region sent Captain Zhao to negotiate with her. They've requisitioned some refrigerated warehouses to store live zombies and survivors rescued from the isolated hospital. Confident that the rapid gunfire was from them, Song Ziqiang wondered curiously what could have gone wrong there to cause such a ruckus, since there were only around 30 zombies locked in the cold storage. She was genuinely confused because the zombies captured were hardly capable of moving, and the military had also stationed half a platoon there with them. Bai listened carefully, and thought that he didn't expect the discovery of the zombies to happen so quickly. This is due to their sluggishness in low temperature, but since the military wouldn't know that extreme conditions increase the probability of zombie mutation. At this moment, Bai had a suddenly realization: the suburban cold storage and mutated zombies were too obvious and coincidental to ignore. That location was indeed the third location of the 3 strange incidents that actually happened in Jiangcheng before the trial, the suburban bombing. So with a wide grin, Bai was excited, wondering what kind of mutation the zombie will be. He then tells the 2 women behind him that they need to go check it out. Meanwhile, at that location, several military men struggle to fend off a mutated zombie. Aiming for its mouth, one of the men throws a hand grenade directly at the mutated zombie, causing it to roar loudly, wallowing in pain. The hit also made it falls backwards, dusting the area as it crushes into the cold storage building. As the smoke of the hand grenade, together with the dust, engulfed the mutant entire figure, encasing it. Its figure hidden within the smoke, making the soldiers unable to see where the mutant was. Suddenly, a large figure grabbed a soldier and with a loud roar, the soldier was crushed to death. Seeing this, Supreme Commander, Captain Zhao, told his men that their weapons could not cause effective damage. So everyone should form a group with the people around them and spread out to attract the mutants' attention separately. They must hold out until reinforcements arrive. At that moment, Song Ziqiang appeared behind Captain Zhao, and while approaching, she told him that he should tell his men to cease fire and retreat. Confused, Captain Zhao turned around and asked what she meant by that. What I meant was, you, Captain Zhao, including your soldiers, can't injure that meat mountain of a creature. She then questioned if Captain Zhao wants his men to plunge into their deaths in vain anyway. This time, Song Ziqiang tells Captain Zhao to order his men to protect her cold storage employees and the survivors from the isolation hospital he brought from there, and he should hurry up about it. Hearing this, Captain Zhao replied that it was impossible. The mutant wasn't slow, and no one can escape without someone restraining it. At the same time, Lu Li, a survivor from the isolation hospital, was about to be crushed by the mutant. her face drenched in cold sweat as she watched the mutant's hand about to slam down on her. Song Ziqiang watched the scene with a smirk, commenting that Captain Zhao shouldn't worry about the mutant's restraint. She had someone who would take care of it. At that moment, Bai appeared at the scene and activated his bone claw skill, piercing the mutant's side. The soldiers helped Lu Li up to her feet, as she watched Bai with a sense of gratitude. Bai, however, was smirking, commenting on the toughness of the mutant's skin. Just a casual grab and he almost dislocated his arm. And from the way it's grown to such an extent, it seems like the mutant will be difficult to deal with. The mutant raised its hand, intending to smash Bai into the ground. However, as its hand approached him, Bai, with his fast reflexes and speed, used his claws to slice multiple wounds on the mutant's entire arm in an instant. He then lands in front of the mutant as it wallows in pain. Realizing this, the mutant clenched its teeth in anger as Bai casually walked towards it. Suddenly, the mutant sharply made a turnaround and smashed the cold storage warehouse, searching for something. Seeing all this, Captain Zhao worriedly asked Song Ziqiang if he was raising a monster. Song Ziqiang replied him with a cheeky grin that Bai wasn't a monster but her partner. In the closest storage room full of meat, the mutant intended to devour the meat to increase in size and strength. However, Bai stops it, teasing the mutant of wasting all these meat. He then activated his evolution devour as several tentacles spread out of him, devouring all the meat, and was also about to devour the mutant's arm. Seeing this, the mutant punched furiously at Bai with its other arm. Fortunately, he makes a leap over the mutant in time as the system chimed in that the devouring was complete. Host has consumed a large amount of frozen beef. Blacklight virus has evolved slightly, increasing host's strength and endurance. Seeing this, Bai smiled. This was truly a premium beef. Not only did it restore his energy but also made him level up. Realizing this, Bai knew that the mutant was trying to replenish its lost energy. The mutant looks exhausted, so it was time for it to die. Bai laughed menacingly at the mutant. Moments later, a massive beam of energy was shot at the mutant, shocking both Song Ziqiang and Captain Zhao. And as the mutant was falling to the ground, Bai followed with a skull-crushing punch to the mutant's forehead. However, immediately after, he flinched when the mutant raised its hands intending to crush Bai. Bai saw this and smirked mockingly, activating his evolution devour again. And as the tentacles burst out and gradually wrap around the mutant's entire body, and also restraining its hands, Captain Zhao was horrified and sweating bullets seeing this. However, Bai continued with his teasing as the mutant screamed needlessly. Captain Zhao could no longer stand idle and watch the scene unfold. He commented that Bai was definitely not human. Then, his face suddenly morphed as a wicked idea occurred to him. He thought of how, with both monsters restrained, it was the perfect opportunity to blow them up. So with a loud shout into his walkie-talkie, he ordered to have his reinforcements launch a missile to his desired coordinates. Fortunately, before he could give out the coordinates, a tap on his shoulder made him halt his actions. He turned to look at Song Ziqiang, who warned him to think carefully. Bai was helping them now, and he also saved his fucking ass a while ago. He doesn't need to do something stupid that will end badly for everyone. 10 minutes later, Bai had successfully devoured the mutant. However, the soldiers, under Captain Zhao's command, aimed their firearms at Bai, who looked unbothered by the threat. Captain Zhao told his men to be on high alert on Bai's every movements. Hearing this made Song Ziqiang displeased, so she reminds the captain about what she said earlier. Captain Zhao replied that he hasn't forgotten. However, if her partner decides to attack, then he will retaliate in kind. Closing his eyes, Bai felt an overwhelming surge of energy as the system prompt notified him that the first obtainment of a zombie virus variant Flesh Mountain. His strength form is primary and gained 500 virus points. Also, he unlocked the Virus King talent called Virus Injection. Seconds later, he opened his eyes, took a deep breath as his gaze sharpens. At that moment, another notification chimed in, notifying Bai that he devoured a rare mutant, which was a first-stage strength-type Flesh Mountain zombie. Therefore, all abilities of the Black Light virus will be greatly enhanced. And with that, his Bone Claws ability has evolved, growing in size and increasing in efficiency. Also, the strength form of the Flesh Mountain decomposed, and as a result, he gained another ability called the Heavy Hammer. This basically makes his hand increase in size massively, along with a superhuman strength. As he examines both abilities, Bai was delighted. Indeed, a significant evolution with the Heavy Hammer. He can feel an incredibly powerful force. However, it was unfortunate that there was nothing he could test it on. Seconds later, his hand retracted to its original form, and as it did, he reached into his jacket pocket for something. Smirking about his biggest gain of the day, the Flesh Mountain Core. The Flesh Mountain Core was a very rare material which could be used to craft equipment. However, Bai wondered what gains he might receive if he finds a way to control it, and even use it to create a flesh that can grow infinitely. As he contemplated on whether or not he should feed the flesh mountain core with more virus, thereby growing another flesh mountain to test its strength. Just then, Song Ziqiong called out to him, ending his reverie. Bai hides the flesh mountain core back in his pocket. At the same time, Lu Lai walks up to him with a bright smile, and as she stretched her hand, introducing herself, Bai told Lu Lai that he heard of her. She is a well-known journalist in Jiangxing, and also a somewhat famous internet celebrity. Curious, Bai then asked if Lu Lai was the one who secretly filmed him at the hospital. Hearing this, she replied him with her nervous smile that indeed, she was the one. Also, she wants to personally thank Bai for saving her twice. Bai closed the space between them and said saving her both times was just a mere coincidence. However, did she film his fight with the Flesh Mountain mutant? Lu Lai replied nervously that it was a professional habit. But if Bai did not like being recorded, she could delete it if he prefers it. However, Lu Lai did not expect Bai to tell her to keep it because he had a use for it, and she shouldn't send it out. They were suddenly interrupted by Captain Zhao, who informed him that their military district commander, Commander Huang, hopes that Bai could explain everything about himself and what he knows to the military. Looking at the captain, Bai remembered Huang Xingqiu, commonly known as Commander Huang, all too well. It was a name he would never forget. After the trials came, he coerced the awakened who were weak and alone, using them like pigs and dogs. At first, they used patriotism and national righteousness to comfort everyone, but later it was just arbitrary bearings and insults. Bai was one of them, struggling and starving, unable to even have a proper meal. The most ridiculous thing was, anyone who tries to leave was accused of treason and hunted down. This forced Bai to leave Jiangxing. So with those thoughts, Bai coldly stared at Captain Zhao, asking Song Ziqiong if he should oblige. Of course not, I don't know anything yet either, so why should you do what he says? Song Ziqiong replied Bai, who smirked asking what he should do then. Song Ziqiong told Bai that he doesn't need to worry, she will handle the situation personally. Seeing Song Ziqiong approaching, Captain Zhao suspiciously told her that she should understand the duty of being a citizen of this country, especially this city. However, Song Ziqiong was not having any of it. She stomped her heels firmly on the ground, and replied Captain Zhao that he should stop spouting nonsense like an official. What fucking duty was he referring to? He was just a platoon leader, not qualified enough to demand anything. Furthermore, he should go tell his master that if he has any issues, he should come to her himself. Hearing this, Captain Zhao was speechless. At that moment, one of his men came up from behind him and informed him that the isolated personnel were causing trouble, making a ruckus. What should they do about it? Hearing this made Captain Zhao gritted his teeth in anger. However, Bai questioned the soldier if there was someone named Lu Feng among the people. The soldier replied that there was, and from what he's seen, Lu Feng was the one causing the most trouble. Hearing that Lu Feng was alive, Bai asked Captain Zhao if he could see him. Captain Zhao readily obliged, knowing Lu Feng was the troublesome one among the lot. Moments later, Lu Feng came out of the building, delighted and asking if his dad called for him. Was that the reason why he was released? He continued boastfully that his dad, Lu Huinong, was the vice president of the first hospital. However, a tap on the shoulder shut him up, and as he looked worriedly at the person, Bai activated his skill, virus injection, and transmitted the zombie virus into Lu Feng's body. After that, he told Lu Feng that he had been looking for him because someone asked him to pass on a message to him. Lu Feng asked who Bai was, but Bai leaned closer to his ear, whispering that Su Zin told him everything that happened to her in his bed the night after. And from what Lu Feng did to her, Su Zin want him dead. Hearing this, Lu Feng began to sweat profusely, questioning Bai how Su Zin survived. It wasn't possible, and Bai was definitely lying. Suddenly, Bai stepped back, loudly telling everyone that Lin Feng was infected and was about to turn into a zombie. The sudden news made everyone alert, watching Lu Feng cautiously. Lu Feng was incredulous, saying Bai was just spouting nonsense. Was he playing him? He continued that Bai was the one about to turn into a zombie when he was done with him. Lu Feng then launched towards Bai, shouting that Su Zin was a bitch. How could she be with him? And this was a lie intending to trick him. Bai was going to die. At that moment, Lu Feng's anger clouded his reasoning. His eyes bulged out as the virus took over, transforming him into semi-mutated zombie. But before he could fully reach Bai, he activated his heavy hammer, punching Lu Feng. Lu Feng's entire upper body disappeared upon impact as the punch created a slight shockwave, shocking everyone. Seeing the results, Bai thought that the skill wasn't bad. It was more powerful than he previously thought. Meanwhile, Captain Zhao was watching Bai's mutated hand with a surprised look, questioning himself if Bai was a superhuman. Bai turned to Song Ziqiong, referring to her as his boss. He told her that he will relay some information to her when they get back. Hearing this shocked Song Zicheong, so she told Bai to just call her Zicheong or Song Jie from this very moment onwards. Puzzled, Bai asked why. Song Zicheong grabbed Bai's hand and replied that she doesn't believe her partner should refer to her as boss. Besides, with this, it's still possible for her and those who also wants to be with him. Hearing this, Bai smirked, saying that everything will depend on her value and performance.